I'm Austin, and I'm the founder of Urban Sadhu Yoga. Um,
Hi, Austin. Good to see you. Nirupa. Nirupa Umapathy. I'm like Austin. I live in Jersey City. I've been a long time client of the yoga studio. How long, Austin, have you been open? I forget now.
we've been open 7 years total,
So
but
I've been
only a year but a little under 9 months as Urban Sadhu.
so I've been a client of Austin's for 7 years. In the last 1 year, I've also been a client of Urban Sadhus.
So Nirupa and I got together, and we decided that we would produce these videos for the exploration of the month, the Urban Sadhu exploration of the month. So each month we're going to have a topic, and we're going to have a conversation about that topic so that we'll kind of inform people what we're doing. This will go a little more globally and be able to reach more people, but also just for the practitioners that are practicing with us in the area, either through Zoom or we don't have Zoom, but we have live stream, and we have through US Yoga Live, that they're just more informed about the topic. Because some of these topics, when we deal with these concepts within yoga, they're very dense. They're not light ideas that you can kind of toss around, and that may be part of the problem that happens within Western yoga, is that we have been introduced to these ideas and concepts and words that have long history to them, and we end up applying our point of view from a Westerner's point of view onto them, and it may kind of slant some of those.
Can I ask you a question on that? So even as a yoga practitioner, if I were to practice at Yoga Sadhu versus going to Asana Soul or going to Yoga Works, I don't even know if they exist anymore. But
they closed everything down.
They closed everything down. So, but I'm just saying, when you talk about a focus of the month, what is
exploration?
So what is so distinctive about a focus of the month that actually is going to help inform the way I show up to the mat, for instance?
Well, I think that it gives a consistency to all of the teachers who are teaching. It gives us a point of view that we're actually we're coming to the class with. And what it does for the yoga student is it introduces you with intense focus on some of these very esoteric ideas that you may not have ever heard of. You may not even know them. You may not even know they exist. Let's face facts. Most of us come to the yoga mat first just for the physical practice. We are injured. We want to feel better. We want to look better, and that's fair. I mean, I think that you have to meet people where they start. But then these explorations of the months are these ideas of focusing on one subject matter, deepens and enriches the practice from the point of view of its traditional heritage. Okay. We're taking it out of the context that this is a fitness class, and we're putting it into the context that this is a tool to go deeper into the self.
I love that. Can I just say one thing about practicing yoga with your studio for 7 years? And I come from India, as you know, and I left India when I was 18. And ironically, my love for yoga started when I started practicing yoga in this country. As a young child, my father would make my sister and I wake up at 6 a.m. and do all these asanas, and we would be like, and as children, we just didn't enjoy it. You know what I mean? But it's I fell in love with yoga after starting to do it in the US.
Right.
And I have a bit of a biased perspective now of yoga because it's largely influenced by the way yoga is taught in the West. And I just want to make that disclaimer up front because
I think that's fair.
In India.
I think that's fair. I mean, we weren't going to talk today about the difference between Western yoga and yoga from India, but one of the differences is Americans really embrace the concept of hatha yoga, Hatha yoga being a late tradition, it's probably only 1,500 years old. It's a tantric tradition. And it's a very specific tradition that says, first, before you go into these very esoteric concepts of profound meditation and reconnecting to the self, you have to purify the body. You have to clean the body out, literally. So Hatha Yoga Pradipika starts out with everything from like learning to vomit and like enemas. Then you change your diet. Then you practice these asanas to prepare the body. And then you explore pranayamas and mudras. And then finally you go into meditation. And at the end of this very thick book, which is basically a textbook on how to, it says the goal of Hatha Yoga is to experience Raja Yoga, which is the yoga of meditation, is the yoga that Krishna teaches Arjuna. It is the yoga of Patanjali, the royal yoga, which is being able to push the senses away and go deeper into yourself and connect with that is infinite instead of finite.
I love that. Does the word yama and pranayama and the niyamas, and I would like to, does that tie back into the focus of the month, for instance? Like, can you explain? I actually do not even think about, I did not know about yamas and niyamas before I started practicing Ashtanga.
Right.
So someone that doesn't know the lineage, like how would you explain yama and niyama?
So yama just simply means to restrict. It means to, so when you talk about pranayama, you are restricting the life force or the breath, the prana. And the experience of breath is the most superficial form of prana there is. We're both experiencing the breath because we have life in the body. And so therefore that is the life force. And to hold our breath or to elongate our breath or to make it short and quick, this is a form or a technique of learning to control something that you have been completely unconscious of probably from day one. The only time you're really conscious of your breath is when your nose is stopped up or you have a little asthma or you're having a bronchitis attack and all of a sudden you are, God forbid, corona right now. I mean, that's one reason why I think more people are talking about pranayama now than they were a year or two ago is because of corona, and it affects the bronchial. But then Patanjali, who also wrote a how-to manual about 2,500 years ago, about 1,000 years before Hatha Yoga Pradipika, he gives a set of restrictions or codes that you're supposed to live by, right? That you're supposed to, he kind of saying, look, if you want to practice yoga, we're not going to start with cleaning up your intestinal tract. We're going to start with cleaning up your actions. We're going to clean up the way you're projecting into the world. So he gives you these yamas or these restrictions.
And what's the niyama then? If a yama is a restriction, then the niyama is the opposite of a restriction?
Niyamas are observations.
Okay.
So a niyama is more about my personal, what I'm doing internally instead of externally.
Okay.
So it's not, so yamas are my actions and how they are sent out into the world. And I'm going to restrict those actions. I'm going to think about those actions before I act. And niyamas are like when I'm sitting alone in contemplation, and what am I doing in those moments of contemplation? And so they're one's internal, one's external.
So the focus of the month, this brings me to the question of the focus of the month. One, what is the focus of the month? And is the focus of the month a yama or a niyama?
So the exploration of the month is called Aparigraha, the forgotten yama. And there are 5 of the yamas. The first one is non-violation, ahimsa, and we hear a lot about that. A lot of even within the method that I came from, which was Jivamukti, we talked a lot about ahimsa. The second one is satya, or truthfulness. The third is asteya, to not steal. The fourth one is brahmacharya, which means continence, or reducing the sexual energy. And as soon as Westerners hit that 4th yama right there, they can't stop talking about sex. So then they get to Aparigraha and they kind of throw it away. So it's the poor little forgotten yama over here that, and Aparigraha, graha means to grasp, and apari means away from, or to not. And so it literally translates into non-grasping or non-clinging. It gets interpreted a lot to greedlessness, which is would apply. Greedlessness would apply, but it then makes aparigraha seem like it's totally about material goods, which I did write about materialism. But aparigraha is deeper than dealing with materialism. It could be me clenching or holding on to an old relationship that isn't working anymore, right? It could be me holding on to value systems that aren't working anymore. It could be me holding on to identifications of who I think I am. It could be me holding or clenching my jaw and grinding my teeth. That it could go as basic as that. It could be me holding or clenching or grasping my shoulders because I'm angry all the time.
When you talk about gripping or non-gripping, the immediate image that comes to my mind, and within the context of my own yoga practice, is physiological. Yeah. As where we hold stress, for instance, and I hold stress, like many people, in my right shoulder, my right neck. When I come into my yoga practice, I have this high aspiration of having the most kick-ass practice today. Yeah. And I go into asana, I immediately find that I start stabilizing through the right side of my body. So for me, it's a gripping and a holding on to an ideal of what something should be as opposed to what is.
Right.
It's the idea of doing the perfect handstand versus how my body is feeling at that point in time on the mat.
And we have to even ask, what is the perfect handstand? Are you gripping onto a concept that doesn't really even exist? That's right. But I mean, one of the things is when you talk about gripping within the body is going to work in 2 ways. It's going to contract, muscle contraction, and then muscle release, right? In fact, your heart, the valve of the heart has to grip and then it has to release for the blood to move through your veins. So the idea of gripping, for my hand to hold a pencil and write a sentence, it has to grip. So gripping is not the problem. It's not letting go of the gripping when you have to let go of it. It's the understanding of not allowing the energy to flow freely, that you're holding on. I mean, imagine if I held onto that pencil, like after I finished writing that note. I mean, at some point, somebody would say, Austin, could you please put down the pencil? And so what happens to us in the body is we don't really understand, because you and I have talked a lot about injury, is that in a way, injury is the body gripping. It's the body protecting itself. It's moving into a defensive energetic. So, through things like massage therapy, through chiropractic work, through relaxation, meditation, asana, the idea is that you're releasing that energy block so the energy can flow freely, right? And
it's also releasing an old memory, right? To your point, the body has a tendency to hold on to an old memory of where pain resided.
Yeah, and it's exactly that is one way to deal with this concept on a very physical level. And like I said, like when we started out, most Westerners come to yoga from the concept of the physical body and wanting to experience yoga as a physical practice. So to talk about that and to is very legitimate. But that also becomes kind of a trap if you think that Aparigraha is only gripping of the body, a gripping of the muscles, a gripping of the, or the feelings or emotions.
I see it as a concept, as a metaphor that manifests itself in many ways. It's
in many, many ways.
It pervades through your entire being. For me, the reason I mentioned the body is that for most people, that it'll be easy to point to one part where they're holding on to something. Mm-hmm. That's the body, right? Yeah. I associate, when you talk about the word gripping, it immediately resonates on a mental level or an intellectual level. It resonates on a spiritual or an emotional level. It resonates from me on a systemic level.
Right.
Yes.
And so then that can move out of that idea of am I just gripping physical muscles that I can touch into a world? Am I gripping onto emotions and thoughts that keep triggering mm-hmm. the tightness in the body? One of the reasons why just to kind of put it in perspective for those who go and read the exploration for this month, I actually wrote about capitalism, consumerism, and the idea of generosity. So I really didn't write about the physical body or even emotions. I actually wrote about a system that we're all experiencing that trains us to grip mm-hmm. and trains us to fear that we don't have enough and we have to hold on to. And I didn't shift it into the physical, because when we were talking about setting this up, I kind of brought up the fact that, if you look at trauma, like you were talking about, like you start to move, the body retains that trauma, and all of a sudden you start to move in that direction, and all of a sudden the body locks up because it's expecting the trauma. When we look at something like, systemic racial trauma in America, if I were to say to someone, well, just don't let that bother you anymore. Like let go of all of that pain and trauma and suffering. That would be spiritual bypassing.
It would just be disrespectful.
So you can't. So the body becomes very subjective.
Yes,
the body is subjective, and that's why it's a beautiful metaphor personally for you to deal with. But it's not the best metaphor for a yoga teacher to start implanting ideas that you have to deal with certain issues in a certain format. And it's interesting because Patanjali doesn't even deal with the body and these concepts in that manner, because he wasn't faced with this issue. You spoke to me. Why don't you tell me, because I also then brought up women and issues of sexual harassment.
So the way trauma sits in the body, I think I come from India, and when I lived in India, and things have certainly changed since, I'm sure, but it was very common to witness open acts of exposure on public buses where, you would actually be in an early morning bus and someone could have their genitals out, or like when you are in a crowded bus.
But for a sexual a harassment reason.
I mean,
these were naked babas. Were they naked? They weren't naked babas.
No, they were not naked babas. No. Or to be to go to college on a really crowded bus and you get groped. And for me, I think that was actually one of the key reasons why I left. Because I come from a middle-class family where I didn't have access to going in a car, that I was being driven around. And at some point, my body shut down. I think the thought of being a woman in a full body and a teenage adolescent woman, 16 to 18, I started losing the concept of the body, and I thought that it was very closely linked to my integrity and my freedom, and that's why I came here. And the way I hold that trauma in my body to this day, it reflects in the way I dress. It reflects in the way I view when someone gazes at me, even if it were to be a loved one who absolutely my partner should be able to look at me in a certain way. But my internal system from that past experience can look at it as covetousness.
Yes.
That gaze.
Right.
Covetousness. So going back to the complex context of the body and injury and what we hold within, I completely resonate with you as to, I would take offense if I, for instance, showed up in a yoga class and a teacher were to tell me as to how I should hold the trauma.
Right. So this is something that, like, this, I come from a tradition. Jivamukti was known for their physical assist. Back in the 80s when they started, there was little, like, asking, you just kind of, that was what you were known, you do, that's how you were trained, you did it. They've changed that point of view slowly, but they have chiseled away at it. But the idea of trauma and sexual abuse and this idea of holding it in the body, I mean, if you're going around right now, I haven't been giving physical assist because of the virus, but I can actually, as a yoga teacher, I've had students that there was an asking, does anybody not want to assist or whatever? But I went to touch somebody and their reaction told me that there was trauma in the body from touch. Now, touch can be also healing. Touch can be also very healing, but touch can bring back that trigger of trauma. So it would be really wrong of me to, like, go to assist somebody and they tighten up and I go, oh, Aparigraha, release that tension, let go of that gripping. It would be incredibly inappropriate for me to suggest that. In fact, what I have to do is actually notice that there was a reaction, and with the great would kind of a back away without running away. Like, I don't know how I'm trying to phrase it.
No, I think that what you're saying is that you at that moment in time have to be in the present of that body and you being around that body to know that the traditional way of aligning someone may not work. You have to surrender to the ideal of, that triangle doesn't look right. Instead, it might be just to hold space in a different way as a teacher.
Right. So that idea, that idea of talking about gripping in the body is very subjective, and you have to ask yourself, why is each individual gripping? Is it a nervous twitch, or is it something much more deeper that is being worked through and or maybe not addressed? I don't know if a person's doing the work or not to relieve trauma, but we do know things like that. It takes, I think I read once that it's like 7 generations. Wow. If people are doing the work, if it's systemic trauma, that if they're doing the work generation after generation, it takes 7 generations to alleviate that trauma in the body. So, that's not something that, 3 months of yoga is going to cure, and we shouldn't act like it's going to cure it.
It's interesting, Austin, but going back to the journey, right? Like, let's take me as a student now. In my body, I also hold past memories. Some memories might not serve the present anymore. And so one of the conscious things about my practice also is to be able to facilitate that movement from what is stale and what is stagnant and what is stuck, and to move into what is going to serve me, right? As a student. And therein is that linkage, the beautiful linkage for me between where the body can be a true vessel of flow as well.
Yes.
Right. And let's just simplistically talk about just injury, for instance. Forget like that there was any sexual abuse or anything like that.
Physical injury.
Like in bow pose, right? I have to every single time coach myself into reminding my body that the tightness or the unpleasantness that I felt is not coming from this moment. It's coming from a past recollection of an asana that I just didn't enjoy. Yeah. And now I have to push past that memory
Right.
and go into the pose at that moment in time. So that's the other side of it, to let
Right.
go of my ideal of gripping onto an old memory.
Right. Well, one, like I said, this early on is the way that the body will function is the body will tighten and clench to protect itself. So there's injury. That is the instinct of the body. Swelling is that idea of clenching. If you ever had, something like where you sprained your ankle and it swells up, it stiffens up, it's trying to put its own little kind of cast system around the joint so that it can protect itself. It limits the mobility. But then what happens is it actually causes pain. It causes inflammation. And some injuries, one of the things is that there are injuries that are, maybe short term that people can work through. Then there are injuries that I think that practitioners have to accept that they're never going to go away, and you're going to have to work around them. And I'm an example of that. I actually played football in high school in the 80s. I was on the line of scrimmage. A guy dove under me and threw his head up, and his helmet rammed into my knee and knocked my knee backwards and ripped out the interior ligament. In the 80s, they didn't have lasers. They didn't have kind of microscopic surgery. They kind of cut you open from your groin down to your ankle, and they took the ligament out, which totally destabilizes the knee joint. It also destabilizes the hip. Yoga for me actually alleviates that pain that I chronically feel. But the idea that in other words, because my hips get out of alignment, I can, through the practice of asana, I can adjust myself and realign my bones from the misalignment. But it's not something it's something that will be for the rest of my life, that I will be in chronic pain, and that is also trauma too. That it's a trauma from a very specific place, a very specific karma that is now going to carry out. And so I think that then that's where you have to get into like the idea that like Virasana for me, where I come and sit on my heels or try to sit down in between my ankles, is excruciatingly painful. However, I also know that as I age, if I don't try to get that range of motion, my knee is going to lock up from arthritis. And I've been even told that by the surgeon. The surgeon said, you have got to stay moving the rest of your life. Don't ever sit down and stop. The last surgeon in New York I went to over a minor thing, he said, the surgery that they gave you in the 80s, he said, I know professional athletes who've had that surgery and they're crippled. And he said, whatever you're doing, don't stop it. And I said, well, I'm doing yoga. He said, don't ever stop. So, but it's never going to be a pleasant experience.
Yeah.
It's never going to be a warm and fuzzy moment. It's always going to be an intense, unpleasant, at times even painful moment to do it, to do Virasana, to come in and prop it out, to set on 2 blocks and a blanket. And so that clenching of the knee, that tightening of the knee is not going to go away, no matter how much I project onto it or kind of say, oh, you should relax or knee relax. It's not going to. So I think that that's also the interesting thing of the dealing with the physical form is the physical form we have to accept. And Patanjali gives us this too. Before he gives us the yamas and the niyamas, he gives us this thing called the kleshas, about right at the top of chapter 2, where he kind of says, look, there are these 5 kleshas that keep you from yoga. And the last one is the death of the body, vidibhesha. And so injury really is us having to deal with the fact that the body is organic. It will decay, it will be injured, it will get sick, and he prepares you for that. And then before he gives you the yamas. So you could actually even apply Aparigraha to Abhidabhesha, saying that don't clench and hold on to the concept of the body. The experience you have in the body is the experience, but don't hold on to it as the infinite idea of the purpose of this journey.
To go beyond the body, to transcend. But now, easily said, right? Like for a lay practitioner showing up to your class, if you were to give that insight, how do you facilitate them to go past it? Because it's so profound. Like, how are you expected as a material being living in a very material capitalist
Oh my God. World, yeah.
How are you asking me to go beyond the body?
So first of all, you have to hear the concept. That's the first thing. And this is a concept that is specific to monastic cultures of either people who left society and go into but we see it throughout the tradition of yoga from the very beginning. I mean, India is one of the few places where, from the start, going all the way back to the Vedas, that they're reminding you are not the material body, you are not the material world. Your goal is to get beyond this material world. So you have to hear it. Then you have to become even interested to do it. And guess what? Everybody's not going to be interested in doing that, because some people are going to just love living in the material world. They're going to just, and that's fine. That's where they are. But, we're talking about now moving into more subtle forms of Aparigraha. Are you grasping onto the concepts of the body? That's one. Or you think you're going to be, what's that old rock song, Forever Young, right?
Yes.
That is a song all about Aparigraha, about this idea of grasping onto that I am going to be forever young. Well, you can be young in spirit. That's going into yoga. But if you think it's going to be that, you're going to always be able to run around and be 23 years old and be at the height of the greatest summer of your life, that you're going to be sincerely disappointed at the end,
So to that point, then the word urban sadhu is urban and sadhu is a hermit. Right? And so in that case, then how would you take Aparigraha and apply it to an everyday, to someone that is living in Jersey City, to someone living in this pandemic, right?
Right.
To come back to this modern day context,
right.
As a student.
So when I came up with the idea and the word, I came up with it because I had a friend of mine, Bhagavan Das, who's a very famous kirtan singer. I was rereading his book, and he talked about Nikaroli Baba, who was his guru, being a jungle sadhu. And I thought, well, I wonder if you can be an urban sadhu. And then there are urban sadhus. But a sadhu is somebody who's renounced something. They've renounced, and in its purest word, it should be that you've kind of renounced society. I think that renouncing some of the things that we have been trained within society would be very healthy for us, because we are now living in a capitalistic, consumeristic society that trains us to grip that from the moment we come out of the womb, and this is that we've never had a moment in history like this. You as a baby are being marketed to be trained to look at mama and say, I want that candy. I want that cereal box. I want that little cart. I want that toy. We've never done that with children. ever. So within capitalist culture, and I mean, we can go deep into the concept of capitalism, and I love talking about this with you because you worked in financing for years. But for capitalism to work, there has to be a consumer.
Yeah.
And
70%, so I mean, to your points, I think 70% of the America's gross domestic product comes from consumer spending.
buying crap. I mean, you know, and that's kind of the truth. A lot of it's just buying crap that's supposed to make you feel like you're complete and whole. And the trouble with it is that you get the object, you know, you get the Dolce & Gabbana glasses, and you want the Gucci glasses.
Yeah.
You know, that you don't feel complete.
It's me, actually, Austin. I think I wonder if you would have ever even associated with me in my past life, because I was living this kind of bipolar life. And I'm sorry I'm using the word incorrectly here, but I can't explain any other way. Like during the day, 7:30 to like 6, I worked on the training floor, and we dealt with large sums of money, literally. And there was parts of my career that I really enjoyed, and this is not about denigrating my career, but it really was about this deep impoverishment that I was building along the way. And the impoverishment was mental and spiritual, because when you're working 12-hour days, you really have lost touch with yourself a little bit, because you've become an instrument of executing an agenda for a corporation or for profitability. And that's fine. But what I'm saying is, at the height of that 12-hour days and the weekends were the escape, I would feed my emptiness by buying the stuff that you're talking about. Maybe not Dolce & Gabbana sunglasses, but it was about buying a new handbag. It was about buying a shiny pair of heels. But the flip of it is, and equally I would show up at the yoga studio in my flip-flops, like how I used to be when I was in India. Right. And that simplicity of the moment of not having to carry any of what was attributed to you as a consumer. And it was a moment of freeing up on the mat. And so every moment I come to class, I would renounce that identity. Right. I would forget for that hour and a half what that other identity is, you know? And
right.
And you would have identified with, you probably saw the side of me that was just someone that showed up on the mat. You never knew the other side of me.
Right. Yeah. But I knew it was there because you worked in financing. Because you know, living in, I mean, basically we say we're living in Jersey City. We live in New York City.
You really are.
Many people who work on Wall Street and work on the floor, and there is a certain, you know, idea of what that standard of life should be if that's what you do. Sorry, that's just what that business is. I worked in theater for years. I mean, there's a certain standard that you're supposed to maintain to be a professional in the theater.
It was not just someone who worked on Wall Street or someone that worked on Broadway, right? When I took the train back then on the subway, you could count the number of people that carried Gucci handbags. And it was not always people that worked and had like big salaries. I think it was generally an aspirational self of how you show up every day.
Let me tell you, I mean, like, because I don't want people like who don't know me to not think that I've just been living the sadhu life all along. I was so in tune to what that purse looked like. I could go down the train and tell you which Chanel bag somebody bought on Canal Street and which was the real one, not even touching it. I could look at the detailing and I could tell you what was the difference in the detailing, because, and that's what a costume designer does. You should, and you know, and in my career, I bought both. I bought for movies, I bought the real Chanel bag, and for, you know, stage purposes, I ran down to Canal Street and bought the, you know, $60 ripoff.
And in a way, your past career was also dressing up someone to be something that they're
to
not.
Be somebody else. So it's like, for me, it was. I mean, that's like another story for a whole another thing. Like how how my career as a costume designer played into yoga, because yeah, that's deep. Because I would get very frustrated with people who thought they were the character. And so when I heard somebody say to me for the first time, "You're not the body, you're not the mind," I was like, yeah, that's what I've been looking for. Yeah, I can put this on, but this isn't who I am. I loved that. I mean, I just embraced that. So for me, like when you said, like, what does somebody do? Like, I don't know really what other people think, because the first time I heard that, that's what I had been looking for all my life in the theater, was that I can pretend to be Yoga Claus, but I'm not Yoga Claus. You know, that's what somebody called me today. They said, "Oh, you're starting to look like a Yoga Claus with that beard." So I thought, yeah, I could pretend to be Yoga Claus for a while.
But coming back to materialism, though,
Yes.
back to
Well, I wanted to touch on. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to touch on that idea of that materialism isn't bad, totally. And in your tradition and where you come, you know, in India, the goddess is wealth.
yeah.
So
Lakshmi, we celebrate the goddess of wealth in India. Money, actually, I've never carried the idea that money is evil. That's a peculiarly American rhetoric for me. I think systemically, the system is not set up to foster a world that works for all of us, but that is a very different and distinct point from saying money is sacred or evil, or you will never find me, coming from a country where if you see a rupee on the ground or a dollar on the ground, you wouldn't just let it lying on the street because it could buy someone a meal, right? Money is sacred. Money is an energy that flows, and etymologically, currency comes from Latin currere, which means to run or to flow. So this idea of money is evil for me is a peculiarly American concept. Maybe it's a Western concept, but capitalism, and I think I also have a very nuanced relationship with capitalism.
yeah,
Because capital by itself, if used correctly and responsibly, can build bridges. It could build a world that actually works for a lot of us. But the way it is set up, the rhetoric and the way it's instrumented, unfortunately they've made it a very divide and conquer kind of instrument.
right.
You know what I mean? Like, and I think that too much of our identity is locked up in how does it work for me, as opposed to thinking about what are the implications on a larger system, right?
So one of the beautiful things about these ideas of Lakshmi being the goddess is that within all of her stories, it's not that there's something wrong with you when Lakshmi comes to you. And Lakshmi, if you listen to the word, it's a much more ancient idea and term than you ever can imagine. The idea of Lady Luck comes from Lakshmi. The European idea is directly, we don't know how they all form at the same time, but they are these spiritual ideas. And there was a time, especially in early Greek and Roman, when Lady Luck was worshipped as in the same format, that she was the goddess of wealth and prosperity, and prosperity was good. Lakshmi is very auspicious when she comes to you, but as soon as you grasp her or grip her or try to control her, she leaves you.
Yes.
She will not stay. So if you don't allow her to flow, like you said, fluidly, she does not stay. So capital is good if capital is used for the purpose of dharma, which are for the a higher duty, a higher consciousness.
Yeah, and it has to have a huge, I think, preservation and a sustainability ethic to it.
If there has to be
it has to flow, and there has to be an ethic that we are preserving and we are sustaining.
Right.
Right.
So if we are creating capital and then we grasp a hold of it,
yeah,
and are unwilling to share it with others, are unwilling to let go of it. I mean, even when you hear all of the craziness about like inheritance taxes in America, like you hear that a lot. Like, this is people trying to hold on to capital from the grave. I don't want my children to be taxed because I died. Well, guess what? You're dead. Guess what? This is no longer an issue or a worry for you. So it's this idea of how consumerism trains us from very early ages to feel like we are not complete, that we're lacking, and that we have to, and if you feel like you're lacking, if I feel like that I'm not going to get a better iPhone, then I'm going to do everything I can to protect this one that I do have.
Yep.
And then try to get the better one while I grip.
Yep.
And that actually is something that we're all experiencing within a capitalistic, consumeristic society. And it doesn't matter what race we are. It doesn't matter what age we are. It doesn't matter what gender we are. Because Madison Avenue has figured out how to market and advertise to us all on every level.
Yes.
They have skewed the playing field.
Can I say it's you bring up a really important point. It almost can be an addiction, and I can give you my personal example. As long as you were in the game of consumption, and I was in the game of consumption very seriously up until 2015. In 2015, end of 2015, I took a vow that I'm not going to shop for any new clothes, discretionary clothes, not like underwear and stuff like that, but
Sure.
New clothes, shoes, and handbags. Single-handedly, that was the biggest addiction I had. When I say it was an addiction, because at one point, my spending on clothes, shoes, and handbags sometimes exceeded the cost of my mortgage. Okay?
Wow.
So this is a serious problem. So end of 2015, I said, I'm not going to shop, and I said for 2 years. I broke it once. I went and bought a sweatshirt at a concert. But other than that, I kept to my vow. And what happened in those 2 years was I completely broke the muscle. What I mean by that is I completely broke the relationship between looking at something as an object to be had, because I would walk by storefronts and I literally lost that muscle that would say, oh, I need that. In 2 years, I retrained that muscle.
Yeah. And
that muscle memory. Or this object referral, or this kind of looking at something and being like, oh, I want that, right? That then rippled into me being able to say, what can I cut out of my muscle memory next?
Yeah.
So that totally just reframed my entire relationship to real estate. What I mean by this is everything stopped becoming a storefront.
Right.
I would walk through city streets in New York and I would actually observe and look at people. I would look at the sky, or look at storefronts even, and be like, that's beautiful. But that relationship completely shifted, and a whole part of my headspace also released. Those are the two most profound years, Austin, for me, actually.
Yeah, but I like how you're describing that too, because here again, you hit the nail on the head. The physical practice of yoga asana is nothing more than a metaphor for these deeper ideas. The body is really a metaphor. It's a metaphor for these experiences that you're having deep within the psyche. Yoga should be self-analysis is what it should be. And when I say self-analysis, I don't mean it in a kind of Freudian way. I mean it in a analysis of the self, the true being who you are, the infinite, instead of the finite. And what you did was a tool to start to change the way you were going through life, and that is why I said there are urban sadhus. Like all of a sudden you've become a renunciate for a time period that you could kind of say, okay, I'm letting go of this, but you actually enjoyed life more by letting go. And you had another beautiful story, I thought, when you were talking about, because I think that here in the West, learning to not let go of the gripping is very, very difficult for us. There are people who are very generous, and they give to causes, and they give great sums of money. But a lot of times when they give to charitable causes, they want their name on a plaque.
Yeah.
And they want the tax exemption form.
Yeah.
So it's a very Western concept of giving. One, I brought up with you that, also in the West, we're affected by Calvinism, and Calvinism is a form of Christianity that appeared in the late 1700s, or early 1700s, I should say. The Pilgrims come out of it. The Puritans come out of it. They're affected by Calvinism. And Calvin said that that people who were wealthy were blessed by God, that they had they were morally upstanding, and they were being showered upon by God. And those that were poor lacked moral values, and they did not have the same continence that upstanding Christians had, and they were poor for a reason.
Oh my God.
That thread still goes through American society so deep, that because Calvinism was one of the founding forms of spirituality in the West, especially when colonization happened here in the States, in the United States. That we still see the poor as they're sponging off the government. They're taking stuff and they're lazy. The welfare queens of the 80s. That they're unwilling to work. Even this, like the debate that you're watching like right now with this between Republicans and Democrats over giving stimulus to people who have been out of work for a year because of a pandemic. The underlying gripping is this idea of Calvinism.
How widely was it? So, I didn't grow up here. So how widely was it indoctrinated, and how did it get indoctrinated? Like, where were you listening to this stuff, in schools?
Well, it's just, my grandfather was a Methodist minister. And so it's in that doctrine subtly. It's always kind of there, Baptists, any of the non-Catholic traditions, because the Catholic Church really did talk a lot about generosity and what needs to happen of this church service to the poor, but it was a little, even with my family coming from a long line of Methodist ministers, they didn't really pull out that checkbook and start writing donations until Christmas time, when they felt guilty. They had to have a little bit of they feel guilty because it's the holidays. And even if you think about it, all of a sudden you're watching television starting around, mid November, you start seeing ads for please donate to this charity and that charity. And then it goes all the way to January, but there's a reason why they kind of put it in that time slot. It's because within Calvinism, there was kind of a guilt that was built in that, I should be charitable at this moment, but I'm going to be slightly begrudging about it.
So it's interesting that you say this. I feel comfortable talking about this because it's my own story. Talking about emotional and spiritual impoverishment. When I was making a lot of money, my charity was not what I don't like the word charity, but my giving, my generosity. I was generous as a person in many ways in terms of giving gifts to my friends, but somehow I didn't have a very substantial giving program in my life.
Yeah.
In fact, when my career and I parted ways, and that's the only way I can describe it, I decided that I had to make up for all those years of me being Dr. Scrooge. I really think I was Scrooge-ish. Actually, I think about it now. Yeah. And I made a big, substantial commitment towards giving. And I'm saying this to you only because where I was coming from, it was coming from the gripping onto an old story of scarcity. I was gripping onto a very age-old, I come from a lower middle class family. I'm always terrified that money is going to run out. And I never had the trust when I was earning all that money that that I had transcended those circumstances.
Right.
I was gripping to an old story, and that led further into a certain kind of what I call spiritual impoverishment.
Right.
And I'm spending all these years it's literally like kind of making up for it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that impoverishment sits within all of us in some form. Going back to your gripping, right? I'm just talking about that. Like,
well, I think that it's also reinforced. I mean, by having it play out, by having, every time you open up your iPhone and you see somebody doing yoga asana in Bali on the beach, and you go, well, my life isn't as glamorous as that.
Yeah. Object referral. Yeah. You're comparing yourself to something else.
You're comparing yourself to something else. And I think that there is such a thing as true scarcity. Like my grandparents were very lovely spiritual people, but they went through the Depression. My grandmother, like every time even a cord came in tying up a package, she would take that and save it and squirrel it away. And by the time she died, there was drawers full of cords and rubber bands and, things that as a child that they just didn't have because of the
That is trauma, right? Like that is real scarcity. That is real scarcity, right? And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to downplay scarcity because I think
no. So I think
we live in a very inequitable world, and to your point, right? Like,
so we have to say that poverty is a form of trauma. It's real. Poverty is real, and the idea of capital going only to make money that will make more capital, that will make more money, that will make more capital, that will make more money, that will make more capital.
At the expense of what? We forget to ask ourselves, at the expense of what?
That is a form of gripping as a society
to an idea
that continues this trauma that we're all experiencing from a capitalistic, consumeristic point of view as a society. I mean, Christianity is no longer the religion in America. It's capitalism. It's consumerism.
Yeah.
The temples are the temples of Wall Street and the shopping malls and Amazon and all of the things that you purchase, these things that are going to make you happy. So Aparigraha for me ended up when I started writing about this, I wanted to say, there's this idea of greed is good and greed is horrible. And where does the yogi fit into this? Where does the yoga practice kind of say, how does wealth fit into my life? Like I said, I am very blessed. I have a home. I have a wonderful husband. I have a house over my head. But I don't have to keep up with the Kardashians. Yeah. That's not my point. That's and to try to keep up with them is only going to make me very unhappy, and I'm going to be very disappointed.
Yeah.
And yoga is a state of feeling complete, feeling you're lacking nothing, feeling that you're okay with what you have and you're willing to allow it to flow and be shared.
I love that. I think that I've learned something that I can apply day to day. And in fact, I think there's little things that you can renounce within the context of every day. It could be a very humble act of the idea that I'm only going to be happy if I have my $5 latte to versus like my home brewed coffee, or buying one fewer. When I go to the supermarket, I have a tendency to hoard sometimes. Buying that one less thing that is going to save on packaging that is going to end up in like some landfill somewhere, right? So renouncing even the smallest micro change that I can make in my life.
Yeah.
To your point on letting go of that, I need more to be complete inside and inside, instead to be content with what is on the table at this point in time.
Yeah.
Right.
That's, and like, how many pairs of yoga tights do you need? Really? Come
Yeah.
to get yourself one good pair of yoga tights, two, so you can wash them, and that's all you need. But and I know there's like every yoga tight company is going to be writing me saying how you're supposed to be supporting us, but in reality, quit making people feel like they need stuff that they don't need. Don't teach this. These teachings are here to liberate you. Yeah. Not to keep you in a cycle.
And to appreciate the abundance that is already here.
Exactly. And that's where gratitude in the practice comes in, that you are gratitude. The gratitude is there so that you feel complete. The practice of actually being charitable so that you start to let go and let that energy flow. It's like the knot in a muscle.
Yeah.
And that's what, I'm hoping that we'll, with us doing this video, and it's so funny because we kept talking about like how long they should be. And I think we've been talking for about an hour and 35 minutes. And
it's funny, but I think we will probably have to clip parts of this at this point. But my point is,
but I think people will listen to it because I think that what you realize is that these are very complex and interesting topics that they're actually what makes for me, they make the yoga practice worth practicing because they get you to think deeper on a deeper level. Yoga is for deep thinkers. That's the truth.
I love it, Austin. I think deep thinkers, but I think what I love about the yoga practice for me is that while I'm not at a point where I can say I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, every single time, and within how I'm taught yoga within your studio, every single time through the vehicle of the body and through the vehicle of the practice on the mat, I've always been able to take away something that's much more subtle over a period of time. I'm not saying that there's a eureka moment that hits me all the time, but I think my yoga practice prepared me for that renunciation of my consumerism.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the manifestation of how yoga shows up in your life.
And this, like, putting your foot behind your head. Very few of us can walk into a yoga studio and for the first time put our foot behind our heads. It's going to be step by step. You're going to put your foot here.
I pronounced the idea of the perfect handstand a long time ago, or to put the foot behind, or to put the leg behind my head. Now, I mean,
but that's a metaphor also for these other practices. That you're not going to let go of the conditioning that a consumerist society has done to you today by listening to us talk about this. It's going to be first the awakening that there's even a concept that there may be something different, and then it's going to be planting that seed and having that grow into the flower.
I love that. And I think that's why I love the name, right? Urban Sadhu, because the complexity of renouncing within the current environment means you are making choices. It also means that you're coexisting with the complexity of often very conflicting things.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I have enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Incredibly. And I think that I think we're going to continue this every month, that this will be like our little conversation between you and I. And we'll talk about these explorations and these ideas. And at this point right now, I'm writing all of them just because I'm trying to get it out there, like what my concept is about this methodology. And but it will be, you know, but maybe one day also there'll be somebody else sitting here because they wrote it instead of me. So that will.
Look forward to seeing more of your curriculum.
Yeah, and and we'll have some, and I know there's like some things I'm trying to also, I want to also address issues that are really matter today, that we're dealing with right now in the moment.
I'm excited for what you're building. I'm excited that you are actually making a very genuine attempt to bridge ancient scriptural knowledge, and transplanting it from across India to here is not trivial. And it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of commitment. As I told you, it's ironic that I'm really falling into the depth of my yoga practice, far away from my country, but I'm loving that there's a very accessible bridge.
Yeah.
And it's important to integrate, I think, asana, but also it's important to integrate what taking the seat means beyond the body. It goes into every aspect of your life. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's beautiful also about, I mean, I don't want to, you know, you find that there have been moments and times when many spiritual traditions have had these same epiphanies that yoga offers us. They've been throughout history. The beautiful thing about India, because it never became it was never orthodoxed into one form. Everything was able to flourish and bloom, whereas, you know, you would have in other traditions where there was a single orthodoxy, they would, you know, when these ideas of I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I am the divine, people were, you know, eliminated. They were executed. They were shut down. They were burned at the stakes. But it's not saying that other people in other cultures didn't have these connections with the infinite and actually came out and said, I understand this higher wisdom that is being offered from a higher source.
Right.
It was just the way that each culture dealt with it when those truths came out.
For themselves.
And some of them were brutal.
Right. Right.
So it's there, and it's there in everybody's heart.
Right.
You know, all of this is there.
Absolutely.
It just has to be revealed.
Yes.
Yeah.
I look forward to this. Thank you.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Namaste.
Namaste.
I will see you soon.
See you soon.
If you like this video, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube, or you can follow us at Urban Sadhu Jersey City on Instagram, or you can even take yoga classes with us virtually at US Yoga Live. That's USYOGALIVE.com. Thank you.